My name is Wangwe. I'm Executive Director of REPOA. Now, REPOA and DFID-ESRC Growth Research Programme is very happy to welcome you to this workshop, which is to discuss challenges and the potential solutions for economic transformation and growth in Tanzania. We are looking forward to your contributions and participation throughout the workshop, so that by the end of the day, we have thrown much better light on agriculture and manufacturing transformation and their contribution to that process in Tanzania, and how finance can be organized to facilitate that process. This collaboration between REPOA and the Growth Research Program at ODI is part of the recognition that the knowledge has now been globalized, and you cannot get a handle on it if you don't have a grip on the local environment as well as the global environment. So the North-South collaboration is part of the attempt to grasp the fact that knowledge is very much globalized, and we need that collaboration in order to get a handle on it. Tanzania has been growing rapidly in the last 10 years or so. And in fact, we are on record among the top fast-growing economies in Africa and in the world. However, there is increasing concern that that growth could have been better shared, and the concern that poverty is not reducing at a fast rate as it should have been. That growth has not been associated with transformation and productivity growth in the agricultural sector, and more towards industrialization and productive services. That is, the prospects of creating productive jobs and rising incomes is not likely to be realized unless the right kind of transformation takes place. REPOA and our colleagues from ODI are engaging in high-quality research on socio-economic transformation through growth in agriculture, industrialization and innovation, and finance. The workshop will discuss some of the findings in the wider policy and research context. We are aware that Vision 2025 envisages that by 2025, Tanzania will have attained a middle income status, not only in terms of income level, because that's not very difficult to reach. In fact, with the rebased figures now, we are at $950 income per capita. So in the next 2 years, we should be able to enter the middle income status. But the Vision 2025 envisaged more than that, more than the level of income per se. It envisaged, more importantly, transformation of the economy from a low productivity agriculture to a modernized agriculture with high productivity, and a semi-industrialized country with manufacturing accounting for a substantial share of GDP, more than 20%, up from the current 7 or 8%, contributing to realization of a strong and competitive economy by the year 2025. So it's growth, but transformation must be part of that growth. It is in this context that the government's long-term perspective plan, 2011-2025, is addressing this transformation process. The first 5-year plan, which is ending next year, concentrated on unleashing the growth potentials, addressing constraints to growth. And the next one, the second 5-year plan, will be addressing the issue of transformation and industrialization. And I'm glad that Dr. Mpango, the Executive Secretary of the Planning Commission, is here. He'll be able to throw further light on that aspect. We would like to emphasize the fact that it's expected that this particular workshop comes at a time when it is really opportune. First, the efforts to begin to chart the second 5-year development plan have started, so this will be a very useful input to that exercise. But secondly, we know elections are taking place this year, and the governments are normally very enthusiastic at the beginning of the phase. So we believe that as they begin the phase, fifth phase, this will be an excellent opportunity to address issues which we'll be putting on the table in this workshop. Agricultural transformation in Tanzania, in the Tanzania context, we need to address how to transform the sector, which is currently dominated by smallholder farmers, while achieving shared growth in the economy, and how best the state can complement market forces in a sector which is predominantly private sector driven. What kinds of public investments will generate good returns in different areas and accelerate agricultural transformation? We hope in the discussion in this in the next session, we'll be able to throw light in that context, how to transform agriculture in the context of Tanzania. Industrialization is a key component of Tanzania's policy on economic transformation. However, Tanzania's manufacturing sector accounted for no more than 8% of GDP, and there are various examples of weak manufacturing performance. The case of pharmaceuticals, which will be presented in the afternoon, is central to the realization of health outcomes, is a case in point, and this will be discussed as a case study, but issues coming out there are applicable to industrialization in general, and that's the point which will be made. This means that the domestic market for industrial products, we know, has been growing, but in many respects, the share of domestic production of industrial products has been declining. And this trend must be arrested, and this we see as the key challenge of transformation through industrialization. Now, for transformation to be realized, there is need for a sound, stable, and efficient financial sector, which can facilitate and sustain this kind of transformation by enabling greater diversification, risk sharing, and investment in higher productivity activities, while ensuring inclusive growth and development. This implies the challenge is to promote financial inclusion, addressing the questions of priorities in financial sector development for economic transformation, the role of financial regulation in promoting a stable and efficient financial sector that can promote transformation, and relative role for domestic and financial capital in promoting economic transformation, and how these can be managed. So again, you are all very welcome, and we look forward to your full participation during the day in this workshop. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed. And let me just say how delighted I am to be here at this workshop on shaping economic transformation. And I'm really delighted that we can work together with the REPOA. And I'm also delighted that I'm in between two leading scholars, two leading African scholars on African growth issues. And I've enjoyed reading your work over the last 2 decades on growth issues. And so I'm very, very happy to be here. So my name is Dirk Velde, and I work at the Overseas Development Institute. But I'm here in the capacity of being a research lead in the DFID-ESRC Growth Research Programme. And what I'll do in these introductory remarks is just briefly explain a little bit about what the DFID-ESRC Growth Research Programme is, what it is about. And then secondly, I'll talk a little bit about my take on economic transformation before we hand over to Professor Ndulu. So first of all, what is DEGRP? So DEGRP is the DFID-ESRC Growth Research Programme. And this is a research scheme. It's funded by DFID, and it works through the Economic and Social Research Council, the ESRC, and it funds high-quality research on low-income countries, and in particular this is a program that funds research on growth issues. And so far it has been able to grant 40 grants, so to provide 40 grants to various researchers who are spread over the world, in low-income countries, in Europe, in US, and these grants are split into 3 themes. So the themes are agriculture, they are innovation and industrialization, and thirdly, financial sector, or finance. Now, of course, when you think about a research team that funds high-quality research, then you've got a wide range of projects and with different subjects. But what we try to do at DEGRP, and ODI has a function within it, it has the evidence and policy group, is to try and cohere and think through what are the main messages that are coming out of all these grants. And some of them are finalizing, some of them are ongoing. And today we'll hear on the research from three research grant holders. And what we do is we try and cohere and think about the messages, and we've organized various meetings in, so recently we had one in Ghana, for example, on the financial sector, and I can talk a bit more on that in a minute. But that's what we do at DEGRP. And today what we think about is the research of 3 grant holders in the context of economic transformation. And economic transformation may be one of the sort of the cohering facets of the program, because the research on agriculture, for example, thinks about how can it contribute to economic transformation, both through the sector becoming more productive, but also how it can link into the rest of the economy. There are a number of grants on innovation, thinking about innovation, how that can contribute to economic transformation. And there are a number of finance grants, both on the microfinance, but also on the macroprudential regulation and on financial, maybe capital flows, how the financial sector can contribute to economic transformation. So we're delighted to be here with co-hosting with REPOA this workshop on economic transformation that can bring together research from various grant holders. Now, on economic transformation in itself is a key issue. It's a key issue in development debates. It's an African-led agenda. The AU 2063 agenda is about structural transformation. It is about economic transformation, and it's also coming through in the various debates on post-2015, when we think about what could be the next set of sustainable development goals. And but of course, what is important here, that's also a priority for the government of Tanzania. So it's a high priority area, and so it would be good to, as Professor Wangwe says, is to take stock of where we are at in terms of economic transformation. And there we've got good news and some challenging news, and of course we've got a set of questions for today. So in terms of the good news out there, is that, as Professor Wangwe said, Tanzania has been growing really fast. And it's been growing really fast. It's been growing much faster than the rest of Africa. So over the last decade or so, it was growing at about 7%, whereas Africa as a whole was growing at about 5% per year. And that, of course, is even much faster than most of the world. So that is very good. At the same time, if you think about economic transformation, we also think about moving from low productivity to high productivity activities. And in that context, we think about export diversification, we think about moving from agriculture to manufacturing to service sectors. There, if you look at the data, then there's some challenging news, I think. So, for example, the share of agriculture in output has barely changed. It's been 30% for the period of 1990 to 2010. On the basis of data collected in one of the DEGRP grants. And also, if you think about manufacturing in terms of particularly the rebate data, so the share of manufacturing in GDP used to be about 9%, it's now 7%. And it's been 7% for quite some time now. So from 2007 to 2013, again, it hasn't changed, or at least it has stabilized. So that is quite challenging. And I think in the context of international scholars who have thought about the role of manufacturing in transformation, for example, Danny Roderick, they talk about also about pre-industrialization or sort of premature industrialization, and say, well, actually, countries are reaching a high point in manufacturing quite early on, and they move prematurely into services sectors. It would be all right if the services sectors were also contributing to economic transformation, but it might be a challenge if it is more in the consumptive side, and when they might not contribute so much to economic transformation. So in that sense, there are some challenges. Also, in the context of export diversification, we know, of course, that Tanzania its exports have been growing rapidly, but it's concentrated in a couple of products, and although there are some signs of diversification, there are still some challenges out there. And in the recent literature on this issue about diversification, about global value chains, about they look at new data, thinking through the domestic component, the domestic value addition in exports. And here, the domestic component, so the domestic value addition, has been growing rapidly in Tanzania over the last 20 years, and we've got the number in the note. It's about 6% a year. That's nice. That's good. That's very good. So the domestic content of exports have been growing at 6% a year each year in the last 20 years. But in neighboring countries, it's been sometimes twice that rate. So there's some discussion about the domestic contribution to exports here to be had. Fortunately, there's also some good news, and I think some recent good news, and there's a World Bank publication, for example, that points out that there are some new promising areas in the area of ICT, for example, that's promising. There are some rapid registration in non-farm enterprises and some other news. So some challenging news in the past, some recent good news, but major challenges ahead. Unfortunately, we can address these questions in the workshop ahead. So we've got three major questions for three sessions. But the chairs will elaborate on those questions in more detail. So first of all, we've got a session on agriculture, thinking through what is the best model for agriculture to contribute to economic transformation. And my colleague Steve Wiggins, who sits there, will chair that session. Then secondly, we've got a session on the contribution of manufacturing industrialization. And here, the key question is, manufacturing is, as a share of GDP, is very low. It's important to increase it. We can learn lessons from the past, how perhaps not to do it. What is the new style industrial policy? Not the old style industrial policy, but a new style industrial policy that can promote capabilities, can in the manufacturing sector in a competitive way, and and then exploit opportunities such as the ones that's been explained in the excellent paper by Professor Wangwe. And then thirdly, we've got a session on finance where we need to think through questions about the contribution of the financial sector to transformation, where we need to think about balancing access to finance, the depth of the financial sector, but also the stability of the financial sector. And so these three areas together, how we can balance these. And here, of course, we are very fortunate to have a keynote speaker who knows all about this. And when we had the debate on the financial sector in the context of this growth research program in Ghana, the discussion there centered around what we call the interest rate spread. The interest rate spread was extremely high in Ghana, which was the spread between what the central bank charges commercial banks and what the commercial banks charges so the customers, the firms, the enterprises, the other customers. The base rate is already high in many African countries, but the interest rate spread was extremely high, particularly in the case of Ghana. And then you end up with interest rates of a total of about 25%. And that will be very hard to then borrow from the formal sector. It will be hard to invest and to transform your economies. But if we look at the data, the same type of data in the case of Tanzania, it seems to be going really well. Now, I'd like to hear from Benno, from Professor Ndulu, why that is the case, or perhaps I'm looking at the wrong data, but I think it will be an interesting debate to be had. So finally, I'd like to thank sort of REPOA, of course, for hosting this and for you for coming here. So I'm really looking forward to an excellent debate on these three areas. And now it's over to Professor Ndulu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our keynote speaker, Professor Benno Ndulu, is currently the governor of the Bank of Tanzania. But he started his long career primarily as an economist, teacher, researcher at the University of Dar es Salaam from the late 70s into the 80s. He has been very active, even from the University of Dar es Salaam, in discussions of policy shifts, policy reforms in the 80s. So he's very familiar with where this kind of discussion came from. After that, he has been active Africa-wide as a research coordinator and later executive director of the African Economic Research Consortium based in Nairobi, but engaged in capacity building in policy research Africa-wide. That is, so he has been discussing these issues and building capacities in these issues. Professor Ndulu has also worked in the World Bank office in Dar es Salaam as a senior research officer there. And at that time, he led discussions of the second generation of economic reforms, where the World Bank was working very closely with the government and research institutions and university to get a handle on the second generation of reforms. Because the first generation of reforms of getting prices right was thought to have been, that would have been sufficient. But over time, it was increasingly realized that you needed much more in terms of institutional reforms, governance, and broader issues of managing the second generation of reforms. And Professor Ndulu was at the center stage in that process. So he's now a governor of the central bank, which is very instrumental in ensuring that the financial sector actually is one which can facilitate the kinds of policy reforms which he engaged very much in building capacity for, engaged very much in that generation of economic reforms. So he's the right person to give us a keynote speech from that point of view, but with that rich background in what it takes to handle policy reforms and what it takes to transform the economy. I will not go into further details of what he has done, because that will take a long time. But I just wanted to give you a highlight that more than being a governor of the central bank, he has a background which is very central to the issues which we'll be discussing today. Very welcome, Professor Ndulu.
Professor Wangwe, Executive Director, REPOA, Dr. Dirk, Willem, Velde, Research League, ODI, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Now, I'm going to speak here not from a perspective of Governor of the Central Bank. I'm going to speak from a perspective of a researcher that has observed developments in this country, as well as developments globally, to put the shaping of economic transformation in Tanzania into perspective. What I'm going to do is first briefly, I think, just go over what has happened. Sometimes because we are in the middle of it, we do not take a step back and realize fully what actually has happened. Second, I'm going to venture on a position in terms of the economic transformation for this country that may break, I think, from the mold of tradition, and I'm going to make a strong case to show that our economic transformation doesn't have to follow the Asian model, and I'll give my reasons for that. Tanzania's growth experience took a sharp turn in the last 2 decades. Its per capita GDP growth, which had averaged a paltry 0.8% in 3.5 decades ending 1995, has averaged nearly 3.5% for the period since then, and it is now steady at this relatively high level, in sharp contrast to the highly volatile and episodic growth of the past. This resilience has also been demonstrated during the challenging periods of the global financial crisis, with its aftermath of a deep global recession since 2008. While the poverty reduction impact of this growth has been comparatively smaller in the first of the 2 decades since 1995, it has picked up considerably in the current decade. The results from the recent Household Budget Survey and the World Bank Poverty Assessment, completed very recently, confirm this positive turn of impact. The recent growth experience has also been accompanied by some significant, though not transformative, changes in the structure of Tanzania's economy. And these changes refer to not only the share of the economy across various sectoral groups, sources of growth, and sectoral composition of sources of foreign exchange earnings, an issue that Dirk spoke about. We would like to divide the real economy at 2001 prices into 3 major sectors. Agriculture, I'm using as a short term, which includes crops, hunting, forestry, and fisheries. Industry, again, a short term for which includes mining, manufacturing, power generation, and construction. And the third category or block is services, which combines the rest. The share of agriculture has declined moderately from about 30% in 1998 to 21% in 2013 in real terms. The share of industry has moderately increased from 17.7% in 1998 to 22% in 2013. The share of services has increased from 45% in 1998 to 50.5% in 2013. In terms of sources of growth, there has been a sharper decline in the contribution of agriculture from nearly 30% contribution to growth in 1998 to 13.3% in 2013. The main reason being that the other sectors have been growing much more rapidly, rather than a decline in the growth rate of agriculture. Contribution of industry to growth, industry defined broadly, rose from 17% to nearly 24%, while that of services rose from 45% to nearly 59%. So the sharpest increase in terms of contribution to growth has occurred in the services sector, followed by industry, and lastly, of course, being agriculture. What is perhaps a more dramatic change in the structure is with respect to the sources of foreign exchange earnings. And here, I think sometimes people don't realize as much as what has actually happened. And this is data, and we have that. By 2014, nearly 90% of the foreign exchange earnings came from what are known as non-traditional exports. The traditional exports, which by the definition that has persisted, includes the 6 major export crops that accounted for 25% of foreign exchange earnings in 1998, contributed only 10% in 2014. This is a fact. Within the non-traditional exports, tourism earnings have risen from US dollars 400 million in 1998 to nearly $2 billion in 2014, contributing a quarter of total earnings currently. Manufacturing exports, this is a surprise to a number of people, have risen extremely sharply, increased from $35.7 million in 1998 actually to current $1.3 billion. You may not believe this number. This is an exact number because on the export side, we do not estimate. We get the earnings. So this is definitely the case. And earnings from transit services, this is in relation to transit trade, have also increased very sharply from US dollar 42 million in 1998 to about 850 million US dollars currently. So by the way, it is also true that currently earnings from transit services exceed earnings from traditional exports as a group. This is a fact. So gold is what we have heard about before, which has gone from about 3 million in 1998. It went all the way to 2.5 billion. Now it's down to 1.7 billion. So our number one foreign exchange earner right now is tourism at 2 billion, followed by gold at 1.7 billion, followed by manufacturing at 1.3 billion, followed by transit services at around 860, and then agriculture close there to about 830 for this year. This is the new structure as far as export earnings are concerned. I thought I would mention that partly because very often we as teachers can also get stuck in brown notes, and we read from the old days and not realize how much is actually happening. And by the way, for the manufacturing sector exports, I wanted to make sure that I have described what typically those are. First are exports mainly to the region and not outside of the region. Of course, there are some to outside the region, and it would include whether it's cement, it's sufurias, it's all sorts of things that locally have been manufactured and exported to the neighboring region. The next point I wanted to raise then is really to focus now more precisely on the economic transformation itself. Now that I've given a broad background of the changes. Economic transformation is a multi-dimensional concept which involves modernization of a country's economy, society, and institutions. The adjustments needed in society and institutions during transformation have been elsewhere described as a controlled revolution. This is Kuznets, 1973. The management of transformation fundamentals require legal and institutional innovations in which the state and other institutions play key roles. Economic transformation is often underpinned by policy measures that are general in scope, such as improving the quantity and quality of infrastructure, setting up a welcoming environment for potential investors, building adequate human capital, promoting technological adoption, and exploiting the comparative advantages of the economy. Transformation must also seek to reduce income inequalities through inclusive growth and change the structure of the economy to make it more resilient to external shocks. All these are dimensions of what ought to be economic transformation. Now, according to a number of scholars, there are 4 elements that have defined economic transformation in the world. First is the declining share of agriculture in GDP and total employment. This is a fact that's observed across all transformations in the world. Second is the migration from rural to urban areas and a rapid process of urbanization that can gainfully absorb the migrants. Because certainly as the share of agriculture goes down and labor is released, it is important that the receiving sector or area be able to absorb and use that released labor gainfully. Third is the rise of a modern industrial and service economy. And fourth is the demographic transition from high to low rates of birth and death. All these are components and characteristics that have accompanied structural transformation. It is important to note the implications of this pattern of economic transformation for poverty reduction. Recent World Bank research confirmed the importance of agriculture in Africa for poverty reduction, primarily because the majority of Africans depend on this sector for livelihood. 1% annual increase in GDP per capita driven by agricultural growth can reduce poverty between 53% and 127% more than growth driven by non-agricultural sector, almost twice as effective in terms of reduction in poverty. However, more recent work, and this is again important for people to go look at that work, by Ferreira, shows that the poverty-reducing effect of growth from agriculture and services are comparable. 1% increase in GDP per capita led by agricultural growth reduces poverty by 0.67%, and the same increase led by services reduces it by 0.96%. So suddenly we see that services have tended also to be more poverty reducing than agriculture across the continent. And this is supported by very detailed empirical work that I would encourage us to try and review, because, and partly, it's also driven by the fact that the services sector is a much larger share of the economy. And therefore you have a combined effect of purely the efficiency of the sector in reducing poverty, plus the larger proportion of that sector being dominant in the economy. So it's not necessarily detrimental to see agriculture's share going down in terms of poverty reduction if the receiving sectors actually are also poverty reducing. And it is important that we start looking in much greater detail, even with the household budget survey data. When we talk about the rural economy, let's do an analysis of which economic activity that the rural population is engaged in. Somehow we normally make a blanket assumption that everybody in the rural area is actually engaged in agriculture. This is changing, and it is important that we do much more in-depth work in relation to that. Now, I would like next, in the next few minutes, to venture into the key question of what would characterize, most likely characterize economic transformation in Tanzania. There are 5 key influential factors that will define Tanzania's economic transformation. 1, Tanzania has a strong comparative advantage in natural resources, unlike Asia, including arable land and water for irrigation, forest reserves and wildlife, a wide range of ornamental and industrial minerals, and discoveries are at very early stages, and the potential is huge. What these endowments offer for economic transformation is resource-based industrialization. Food manufacturers, agro-processing, and services linked to tourism also can take advantage of our natural attractions. So we do have that comparative advantage, and we should build our economic transformation in adding value and utilization exactly of those natural resources. Second, Tanzania's geographic location endows it a potential of being the gateway to the landlocked countries of the Great Lakes region. With appropriate investment and policies, Tanzania can take advantage of its shorter distance to destinations without going through third countries. And this is the only country that can do that. You go via Kenya, you have to go through third countries. You go from the south, you have to go through third countries to reach this landlocked. We have direct borders with all the landlocked countries, which not only minimizes distance, but also minimizes transactions costs related to border crossing, potentially. I'm saying potentially because there are things that would have to do. This opens up a huge opportunity for growth in transit and logistical services. To the extent relocation of labor-intensive industries from Asia to serve this market, meaning the regional market, or location of major warehouses for trade from Asia in our coastal areas, it provides a huge potential for growth of services in trade with the region. So this is the second major opportunity that we have. Third factor, the recent shift of dominant technology from mechanical, which drove industrialization, to ICT as a dominant driver of productivity growth and expansion of affordable services, opens the door for rapid growth of ICT-based or facilitated services. Fortunately, Tanzania has made a major investment in ICT infrastructure in the form of 10,000 kilometers network of fiber optic cable, and is well connected with all landlocked neighbors as a possible data gateway. and hence opens an opportunity for a wide range of IT-based products and services, something then again that this economy can exploit. Fortunately, also the ongoing initiative to impart IT skills in schools as part of Tanzania's Beyond Tomorrow initiative will further improve capabilities to exploit these opportunities. Fourth, abundant and youthful labor is another opportunity the country can exploit against the background of aging population in developed and a number of emerging economies. Labor costs in Asia have been increasing with increases in wages and incomes, engendering relative disadvantage competition-wise for labor-intensive manufacturing. Tanzania can exploit this advantage if it fixes the problems linked to high costs of doing business. Finally, regional integration initiatives currently being pursued offer opportunity to exploit regional demand for expanding industrial investment. In fact, the bulk of Tanzania's manufactured exports are for the region. Africa's economy has now achieved a scale, and again, here is something that is happening and very often we do not pay good attention to. With a GDP in PPP dollars, in purchasing power parity dollars, of 5.2 trillion. This is the last count per IMF. This is Africa, including North Africa. Excluding North Africa, we are talking about a GDP of $3.4 trillion. So for Africa as a whole, if Africa as a whole was integrated and became one economy, it would actually be the 5th largest economy in the world. We are used to comparing Africa to, I recall, Belgium. All the books you read, yeah, it was always comparing with Belgium. Current size of African economy is more than 5 times the economy of Belgium. So things have changed very rapidly, and all in a span of 2.5 decades. And therefore, it has built now a basis for looking at the demand of domestic market from the integrated point of view. Not only that, you may also wish to note that currently 60% of African population actually lives in middle-income countries. It's no more the old story where all the middle-income countries were tiny countries like Mauritius, Botswana, etc., all of them with small populations. You have some big countries now that have entered that league, including Nigeria, Sudan, and a few other countries where population is quite significant. So the middle income, middle class group, as estimated by ADB in the latest, is at around 350 million people currently for Africa. And this group actually has increased almost threefold between 1985 and currently. And they spend collectively in a year $680 billion, which is a huge demand. So Africa can now be also a learning ground for industry in the sense where we learn to compete beyond the region. Because we have a natural protection related, although it's not good, transportation and related costs give us definitely better location relative to African markets than those that are coming all the way from outside. But it does give this a good basis. Also, we may wish to note that the region has the highest rate of urbanization in the world at about 3.6% annually, expanding rapidly. Currently, more than 36% of the population live in urban areas. And by 2030, the projection is that half of African population will be in the urban areas. And therefore, services, particularly in the context of the urban economy, become extremely important as part of the structure of our economies. Now, I focus on those partly to give you a sense that we do not have to follow precisely the Asian model where we focus only on manufacturing, because our comparative advantage, our resource endowment actually opens a totally new door for us. We'll still be doing industrialization, but industrialization which is linked to using our resource base. We can still exploit the fact that there are 85 million jobs ready to move from China for labor-intensive manufacturing, as estimated currently, to be the destination for those, partly because of being low labor cost region more broadly. And definitely we can exploit all the other endowments we have in terms of encouraging services. So the upshot of this is that we need to focus on what it takes to exploit these opportunities. And I hope that's going to be part of what is going to be the conversation throughout the day today. And I thank you.